Perfect. All right. So Les, we wanted to start not quite in the training realm, but maybe training adjacent, more in the Spellman Performance realm. And again, I know this is a conversation that you've had before, but I think it's really interesting, especially for Hunter and me, as we've continued to build out, move the needle, and some of the things that we're doing in conjunction with what we do in the team sport side, and seeing the evolution of Spellman Performance. Obviously, you've talked about some of the beginning parts and a lot of the friction that you dealt with, especially getting going early. But I think really interestingly is when you look more recently, so 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, the evolution that you've seen and what you've planned it to be compared to what it was, and then also looking forward where you think that you are going in the future. So kind of, can you take us down that rabbit hole first of what you thought it was going to be, where it actually become, and then where you actually see it going?
Yeah, I guess the interesting piece of information for this is that I didn't really plan on coaching. It was kind of accidental. I basically started coaching as a secondary way to stay involved in sports. So I was playing rugby at the time. I didn't make the team, and I was like, all right, I need to stay in shape, I need to stick around. And I needed like my mornings open. So, to train and do everything and work out. So easiest thing for me to do at the time was like, all right, well, I'm already training. I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm gonna hop in and start coaching. But I quickly found out like coaching was probably my thing. And it's probably a combination of my mom being a teacher, teaching art, and teaching me her process of how she teaches. I can't paint at all, but she was very specific in like her teaching process. And it was something I picked up on early on. And then my dad just being like a hustler and working his ass off all the time. Like I was kind of just like pushed into a realm where I was used to working with people and teaching. So initially it was just kind of like, here's some side money to keep me involved. But it grew. And as it grew, it's kind of like, you don't really like, I guess the best way I can explain is I didn't really have a plan in a like 5 year structure and I'm going to build this into a major business and I'm going to grow this and grow that. It was really just like survival at first. Rent's due on the first or the second or whatever it is. And I need to make rent. So I'm going to work X amount of hours to make that happen. And then that quickly grew from like, okay, rent's paid. All right, now I want to expand this and expand this and expand this. So it originally started off kind of just basic. So somewhere along the lines, I looked at this like, dude, I think this could be a career for me. And everyone was asking me back home, like, what are you doing? My mom, who's here right now, about to take care of the baby, but my mom was like telling everyone I was a gym teacher. She was just kind of like, like this is like, Les is out in Cali and he's enjoying his time, but he needs to find a job. I went back one Thanksgiving and I was like, yo, mom, I'm like, I'm into this coaching thing and I think this could be my career. I think I can make this a full-time thing. But I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. So really from that point, that was probably 2015, 2016. I hadn't really done much professionally other than work with the Olympic teams for USA Rugby because I was involved in that and knew some people. So really what I did is I started out by sending an email to every single agent in the NFL. It's like embarrassing because I just found the email a couple of days ago. And I sent an email like, hey, my name is Les Spellman. It was like way too long of an email. It was like pages long. This is my story and I went through an accident and I figured this out and now I'm coaching, whatever. It was like a sob story, but I didn't get any responses, like zero. And my ticket was, in order to make this professional, I have to start working with higher level athletes and I have to start making more money and charging more. So I was like, okay, I need to get a response. I didn't get any responses in 2016. In fact, this is the first year I was like brought in to do NFL Combine from another group. And when I showed up, I thought I was a lead guy and I wasn't. I was actually like an intern. So like I had no NFL clients. I had nothing in 2016. I was basically like a water boy running around helping out some other guys. 2017, I had one agent reply to my email because I kept sending them out. And he was like, yo, I got this quarterback. His name is Dakota Prukop. He plays at Oregon. I was like, I'll take him. And then after I sent back, I was like, how much are you going to pay me for it? And he's like, oh, nothing. So I took my first client 2017 and I didn't get paid $1 for it. And that basically grew my business because he brought a friend, Johnny Munt, who's still in the league now. Johnny Munt brought a friend. They told their friends and then it just grew. So, quickly what happened was is like I realized the NFL Combine was like my ticket. It was going to be my thing. And especially just speed because that was the thing I was most interested in. And it grew from 2017, 2018, I had 18 guys. 2019, I had 30 guys. 2020, I had Joe Burrow. And it just grew and grew and grew. So it was like, it felt like it happened overnight. It felt like it happened like out of nowhere. But yeah, I mean, I was going from basically living in my car with one guy to making it NFL. And obviously, like if you know anything about NFL Combine, it can't pay your bills. Like you could do it to develop a name and develop credibility, but you quickly have to switch into some level of business. So it was kind of the same factor for me, which was survival. I did Combine. Whatever money I made, I spent because I had to hire, you know, staff and get meals and hire massage therapists and things like that. So the money drew up, it was drying up quickly. So eventually I was like, all right, I need to productize this. And I didn't really want to do the gym thing. Like I had done a little bit of that in the past, but I saw how quickly they rose and how fast they fell. And I didn't really want to do like the personal training one-on-one thing or like travel with a client for 6 months a year. And really at the time, the biggest thing that was happening was that we could have digital conversations. And I was like, look, if I can take some of this educational piece that I'm doing in person and do it digitally, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start giving people the lessons that I learned coming up from, basically living in my car and training one NFL guy to having like 12 first round picks. And there's got to be something that someone can grasp onto. And that was my original thought. So it grew basically from that original thought. And the rest of it's just been survival, to be honest with you. So yeah, that's kind of like the origin part of it.
At this point in your business's life, when you have like a normal day, obviously today and the last couple of days is not a normal day welcoming another child, but on a normal day, how much of your time is spent training athletes, and then like how much time do you spend on like the business side of like thinking of new things, potentially creating content, like doing the things more away from athletes but trying to grow your business?
Yeah, it's seasonal because in January through June, I'm a traditional coach. Like I coach from 7 a.m. to like 3 p.m. and then do a bunch of coaching, post coaching things like data or whatever. So it's like my whole day. It's all I do full time for those months. Now the rest of the year is where I start to branch out into other pieces. So like right now, we have different branches of the business that kind of all exist at the same time. And to be fair, like I'm the least skilled in any of these businesses. I think the only piece that I have is in terms of like vision, and I think in terms of vision, but also just like what's important for the athletes. Like I understand that part really well. And that's what I contribute to each of the businesses. During the day, coaching takes priority, but then after that, the next priority is researching and understanding the data. And then the third part of that is working on the business. Obviously, in order for any of those to survive, I have to have somebody that looks at the business first, that looks at the numbers first. So we've hired a good amount of people in the past that have helped us with those pieces. But my original pitch to anyone that I was working with was like, look, I'm a coach first. That's what I know. The business world is it's really hard for me to understand right now, but I'm going to learn as I go. But it's definitely third in priority. So when I would say a typical day is coaching first, researching and looking through data second. I probably spend like 2 to 3 hours a day if I can on that. And then the last part of the day is more of like to me it's brainless, but it's like the business side of it, looking through that. So it just depends on the time of year for sure.
So when I was working at TC Boost, it was like me, Tommy Christian, Matt Thomas, guys. We would always do these combine groups at the beginning of the year, and we'd have groups of 10 were like a big group for us, and we'd have guys from like Illinois, Midwest, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do. Like it's hard to have a combine like a pro day group in Northern Illinois because it's just fucking brutally cold. Like it's
so cold.
but it's so brutally cold. But we would get guys and we would just be talking to them and they'd be like, oh, like Les Spellman, like that's like the combine guy. So I know obviously
No way.
You think of yourself more than just that. So can you talk about what are the different branches of things you have? Because obviously you have the combine stuff, you have your NFL offseason stuff,
Yeah.
and then you also have the speed lab stuff. So can you just the different branches of where Spellman Performance kind of has their different things?
Yeah, well, that's humbling, first of all. Tommy and Matt and those guys, like I love those guys. And I interned at EFT. You know EFT?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
with Elias. Yeah. Okay, so man, this is like I was looking through this question last night. I was like, I had to write it down. But the main business that like actually makes money is universal speed rating. And originally that was created to have like some level of standard for how fast people are outside of 40-yard dash, outside 100-meter runs, standardized the miles per hour, and then percentile rank people across that. So that started off as just like kind of like a free project, and then now we have over 500,000 tests in that. So it grew into something a little bit bigger. But also with that, there's speed labs. So speed labs are basically like businesses within the universal speed rating ecosystem that we help grow, we help market, we help push out. Like we basically give them like a speed system to grow their business, but they're existing businesses already. So like if you have a gym, if you're already running something and you're like, hey, I want to add speed as a service, like it's that. It's not to like make a parallel, but it's kind of like what Gym Launch did originally. Is like coaches were popping up wanting to start their own gyms, but there's no like playbook to do it. So it's kind of like that. Basically from there, we've developed 225 of those. So that's grown pretty quickly. And that's like the main, I would say, core business that allows us to do everything else. Because everything else isn't as like, I would say, like revenue driven. You know what I mean? Like coaching, if you're into coaching to make massive amounts of revenue, you might want to you might want to go do something else. So that's the main piece. The second piece from there is Spellman Performance was the original company, and that still operates the same. So that's coaching, that's education, that's like, all the webinars, the podcasts, all that stuff. That's just been growing kind of organically over time. So NFL Combine's in that. All the educational courses that I've done are in that. All of my like personal like coaching and things like that are in that. Consulting. When I was consulting with Arizona, it was in that. So that's the second piece. The third one is called Performance Lab, and that's just a partnership with Surf Soccer, which is the largest soccer organization in San Diego. It might be largest in the country. It's pretty big. There's like 50,000 kids nationwide. It's something crazy. But basically, we start off by partnering with the club and basically giving services to the teams, like speed, conditioning, some little sports science things, like nothing crazy, but some basic stuff. And that grew into us actually building a facility and getting a piece of land and putting a weight room and a field out there. That's the third one. And then the fourth one is just our nonprofit. And that's basically allowing kids that can't afford training or services to be able to train and be in our groups. And that's like the more recent one that's growing. That's going to be a little bit more active kind of outside of San Diego as we grow. But yeah, it's basically those four. I'm probably missing something, but those are the main four.
Dude, I kept seeing your now facility like show up on your Instagram, and then I would see it on like Danny and Chris's Instagram. I was like, what is this place? Like,
Yeah.
what is this spot?
Yeah.
And then I was talking to Danny, and they're like, oh yeah, we use Les's stuff sometimes. And I was like, that is because it's like almost like a Connex with like garage doors, right?
Yeah.
With a
It's
weight
it's
room in it,
literally
out to a field.
it's just a trailer. Like we just got an empty gray trailer, painted it black, and then threw some weights in it, and then put Bermuda grass down. Bermuda's like the golf course grass.
Yeah.
And I've become like a grass connoisseur, by the way, because this is like a whole ecosystem and world. But it's kind of got the stiffness of like a turf. Oh, is your daughter?
She sneaks in here sometimes. My wife is on baby duty, but sometimes she loses track of her, so she might
No,
be
it's
in here for a
okay.
second.
My daughter will definitely pop up in here too, but it's all good. But yeah, so it's got the stiffness of like turf, but it's all grass. You have to treat it extremely well. You have to put iron on it. You have to like aerate it. You have to water it. You have to do a lot to make it right. But our main target was like we need to find a piece of land that we could put some really nice grass on, and then build a gym next to it. So yeah, that's kind of what we did.
The facility is sick, and I know Mike's been by to see it.
It
And
is like it's like not like luxurious, but like it's exactly what you need for the space,
Yes.
and like it's a good space. You have like the weight room stuff. Like obviously it's not like a huge space, but like it's for the weight room. But it's like you have this nice open space. You have everything you need from the weight room perspective, and it's obviously like a efficient and effective space that like most places you go into. It's like wow, why are we set up like so poorly? It's like it was obviously
Yeah.
designed for like it's like there's a speed development facility, and like we also have the availability to do like the tech and the weight room stuff too.
Yeah,
what
exactly. There's 3 racks, so it's not a lot in there.
One of
Yeah.
the things that I was curious about, whenever you're talking about all those different avenues of what you have going on, like how many people are working for Spellman Performance?
I think we're at right now. So it ebbs and flows with the combine, obviously, because during combine you'll have like 15 staff members. So if you exclude combine and just think about coaches, marketing, I think we're at like 20. We're almost at 20 now, like 18 to 20. Yeah. Because then we have like within the Speed Lab ecosystem, you have directors which help lead like different regions of the country. We have our business development people. Yeah, it's getting up there.
Yeah, it's got to be a lot for all the things that you just mentioned and all the things you have popping up. Like no one person could handle that within 24 hours. Like that's a lot of stuff.
Especially not me because I'm not good at any of that stuff, to be honest. There's
That's
no
what
way.
people that's what people do whenever you like work in sport is like you want to surround yourself with like people that are good in other areas, and that's the same thing with business. I feel like if you're not
100%.
good with like certain parts of business, then you just hire people around you that are good with those parts of business to kind of like create an
Yeah,
ecosystem.
I'm probably a five at every part of it. Like not any above that. I know enough, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be hired for any of the roles that we just recently hired in my business.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way if I applied and had a resume and interviewed, I would have been the last candidate in a lot of them. And I think but that's important. It's like you want to build, like, if you're a strength coach, you don't need to be like a 10 out of 10 at sports science or PT or nutrition. You definitely got to be a five to understand what they're saying, but you want to hire those people that build your strengths outside of that for sure, you know?
Definitely.
And it's cool like seeing like you guys operate with like Danny and Chris because it's obvious like they bring these complements of training and performance that like make the ecosystem obviously operate at a really high level. And that was part of our conversation about kind of the whole ecosystem that you guys created around CAT. And I want to dig into some training questions. The last question I'm
Yeah.
going to ask though in the business side before we get there is the kind of like one of those very last questions that we sent to you in terms of the business side. And I know that you've talked about in the past where like the world of speed development on the perform in the private side was like it was this huge gap that was missing. And you guys obviously filled that really well. And part of like the Speed Lab stuff has continued to fill that not only in Southern California, but also all over the country. Like now though, do you still see that as like a massive gap in performance, especially in private setting, that continues to need to be filled and like that the ability to expand within that for you guys especially is still limitless? Or do you see these other areas of performance, especially in the private world, that like, hey, these are being actively underserved and we have to figure out better ways to fill in these gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was thinking about that as I read that. I think the main thing that when I started, speed was kind of like something most people weren't doing, didn't really understand. Like, I think it was thought that you have to be like a track coach and a biomechanist to understand speed, to teach speed. And that wasn't something that like strength coaches were set up to do at the time. And it was like, kind of like, well, how important is it? Does it really matter? Does it move the needle? Can you actually be fast? Oh, move the needle. That was a good little pun. Yeah, got you guys. Um, but yeah, like I think over time that obviously shifted to, okay, we know this is important. We know that we should be doing it, and we know that like most people can do it. So I think people like Stu McMillan and Altus and Dan made speed information so accessible that people like me could just read it, understand it, and apply it. And then basically all I did was like take the information I was getting from Stu and those guys, and I was like, this is how I'm using it with kids, you know, and that kind of grew into the NFL space. But I think there was this massive gap in like participation in the speed projects, I guess. Now I don't see that. I think everyone's participating, but there's a level of like, I don't know how to say this respectfully, but I'm gonna just say it because like I don't really care. Like I always tell Danny, like I can't really be fired, but I can, but I can't. I think there's a lot of people that are popping up as experts and like they hop into it and it's like the only way I can participate in this is if I compete and become an expert. And I think what happens is a lot of pseudoscience ends up popping up because people are like, this is the only way to get faster. It's a marketing scheme. That's not what it's meant to do. Like it's a very complicated subject. So you'll end up preying on people that don't know any better, that start believing in that and start hopping on the train. But people get away from first principles when it comes to that, you know? And I think right now we're looking at a boom in social media and TikTok and all these things where people can just say whatever and develop a following if they seem convincing. Or they could just chat GPT stuff and just plaster it all over the internet. You know, I see a lot of that too. So I think the speed world is boomed. And I don't know. I mean, this is something Danny and I talk about. I think it's good, but I don't know if it's the way it is now, if it's helpful. I'm trying to choose my words carefully to not be disrespectful to anybody. But yeah, if you're offended, I guess I'm talking to you. You know, it's boomed, but it hasn't necessarily boomed from the standpoint of more people researching and doing things the right way. Like Ken Clark is spending all his time researching, and Stu is doing experiments, and Dan. Like there's the godfathers of this space are still operating that way. And they're probably just shaking their heads at all of us, including me. Like, I know Stu calls me. He's like, well, you're an idiot. And I'm like, okay, tell me why. But I think our space has ballooned to the point where it's become, this is the most important thing. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's important. I think it's an aspect of things. But even I've caught myself now looking back and saying, man, I don't know if I was right there. I might have put too much importance on it. And now we're looking into like the deceleration or the change of direction, agility piece. We're looking to the prevention piece. We're even looking to how do you develop qualities in the weight room, which I know we'll talk about. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm guilty of perpetuating that for sure, but it's not in the place where it needs to be yet, for sure.
I think it is interesting to see like the transition of things in our field because it's like either driven by really really intelligent individuals like yourself and Ken Clark and Stu from a speed realm, or it's kind of driven from just like what goes viral on social media, like you touched on.
100%.
But I also think that like most coaches that have been in the field for a while can sift through like the nonsense and like, okay, these are the people that are kind of leading this space. I think it's like the young coaches, the interns that are just coming up, they're like, oh, this is cool. Let me put this in my program. And that's where it gets a little hairy because those young coaches are being so influenced. And it's like,
Yeah.
shit, that's probably not the best way to go about things. But
Yeah.
But also,
I
like-
got to follow up on that because
Yeah.
I think the piece that I understand the most about this now is that everybody wants to invent something new. And like I'll go on record and say like nothing that I've done has ever been like new or novel or anything. It's all been like reading somebody a lot smarter, somebody that's researched. Like I don't have a research background. I don't have a PhD. Like there's people that are researching, that are doing the work. And all that I'm doing is I'm connecting this research to this research and then trying it out and experimenting and seeing if it works with the kids. And if it does, you move it up. But I think a lot of people hop in the industry is like, I got to create something new. I got to do this. I got to come up with a new word. And it's like, bro, it's like, that's not the point, you know?
Well, I think also a great thing, though, when you talk about having someone like Stu to call you and tell you that you're being an idiot, if in fact you are being an idiot, because he
Yes.
keeps, your radar pointing in the right direction, whereas most people don't have someone who is like, okay, this person, like, if he's telling me I'm an idiot, like, chances are I'm probably being an idiot. And it's like, we'll
Yes.
get, like, texts from people that, like, we respect. They're like, dude, you just said something that we just saw on social media, and, like, you're totally wrong. And we're like, fuck,
Yes.
like, I guess we were totally wrong. Or, like, we go back into it. So, but, like, what a great way to have a radar to set you back on course, because very few people actually have that in their corner. So,
I wanted to dig into training a little bit, and I think the cool segue to be able to do that would be talking about like a little bit of a case study. And the case study that I think would be interesting to just like chat about first is the Caterina Macario
Yes.
project, because when I was down in San Diego now a couple months ago or whatever, we had the chance to sit down with Danny and Chris and we talked about her specifically. And it was just like, it's always interesting to talk about case studies as opposed to just like hypothetical training conversation. It's like, this is what we actually did with this individual. And we were able to dig into what those two handled within the space. And I mean, they touched on what you did, but I think it'd be cool to hear about your process with her, like what your evaluation looked like, what your training looked like. And we can do it from like a 10,000 foot view. And then you can get on the details on what you think is important. But it would kind of tie a bow on that whole experience that they started from my time in San Diego.
Yeah, no, it's dope. And I listened to that podcast and it's funny because like I'm obviously with Danny and Chris every day, but I'm listening to it like, oh, I didn't know that's what you're doing. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was interesting. It was cool to see that perspective. But just to give a quick backstory, I met Kat when she was 13. She just moved to the U.S. from Brazil basically because in Brazil, there's no like system for girls to play soccer. Like not at the time, at least. Like if you're a really talented girl soccer player, kind of have to go somewhere else and then come back to the country. So she came to the U.S. with her dad at 13. Neither of them spoke very good English, and her dad found me through one of her friends that was already training with me, and he just showed me like a newspaper article about Katarina being like a really good soccer player. And I was like, cool, well, let's lock in. I saw her almost every single day from the time she was 13 to the time she was 17. So training with me in San Diego, and just to give you context on this, I was not a very good coach at the time. Like I was just experimenting and trying things. And I think at the time, I was in like a Jay Schroeder phase, and then that led to like I was part of Velocity, so I was into their methodology, and then I took her through like 13 different methodologies in that time. So like I don't know how effective it was. She always credits me and is like, man, like I wouldn't be here without Les, and I'm like, you probably would have been there maybe a year or two sooner. But anyway, I have this relationship with Kat that was like really, really, really tight. Like she's like my sister. We talk almost every day, just almost as like friends. And now that she's older, it's like we have a different relationship. So she hits me up and she's like, yo, I really want to be the best player in the world. I'm struggling a little bit on the physical side. Like mentally, I know I can be there, and technically I know I can be there. But on the physical side, I keep running into issues like pain, like Achilles pain, knee pain, back pain, kind of the mixture of that. To give a little bit more context, as you probably heard from Danny's, is that she had bilateral ACL. She had a meniscus, piece, but these were a couple of years ago, so they'd all been cleared and figured out. So we're coming off the NFL Combine where we were like dive deep into the quadrant system stuff that James Wild had done. And I know Danny and Chris explained it, but basically I'll re-explain it as you have a x-axis where you have flight time and contact time. So on the left side of that axis, you have people that are more air-based. On the right side, you have the people that are more contact-based. What percentage of the time do they spend in the air or the ground? You have ground-based, you have air-based. And then the y-axis, you have stride length and you have stride frequency. So you have people that are more length-based at the top. You have people that are more frequency-based at the bottom. So you end up with 4 different archetypes. And within those 4 archetypes, there's magnitude that's associated with it. So it's like you're not just in quadrant 1 and you're a bounder. You're like, how deep into that strategy are you? So the further you are into that strategy, the further outside the norm. Like if you're way outside the norm and you're a bounder, it's probably problematic. It's probably an issue. And the way that we classified our NFL guys is like if you're within like 1 standard deviation within your quadrant, like you're probably okay. Once you get to 1.5, all right, you're starting to get a little bit outside, probably problematic. Once you get to 2, you're most likely talented and you're most likely a problem. And a lot of the really talented people end up outside because they do something really well, but there's a cost to it. So when we brought Kat in, we're coming off this high of the combine, like, oh man, it worked, it was awesome. And we profiled her first on her movement strategy, so our quadrants. So she was a bounder, and she was very problematic. Like it was like 2.3 standard deviations away from the norm. So it was like something that we knew was a problem. So her problem was she had very high air time and a very long step length. So people that are bounders are typically, you think about the word bounding, like kind of elastic, based, like they utilize the stretch shortening cycle pretty well. They can move through like big ranges of motion, really high knee lift, all those things. But it comes at a cost because you're always crashing into the ground. And the strategy that you use is not like necessarily the best strategy to accelerate repeatedly in a soccer game. Like if you're a bounder and you're that far away from the norm and you're not like in track and field, it's probably an issue because bounders don't like distance. They don't like a lot of volume. They don't like repeated accelerations and things because you're constantly stressing that Achilles to stretch and to be a part of that propulsion equation. Like basically the bounders end up like over plantar flexing, like you're shooting a free throw and your wrist kind of like flops down, like your ankle's consistently doing that fast plantar flexion. So it doesn't really go well with volume. So the first lens that we looked at was like, okay, we got to take Katarina and move her from problematic into the norm, somewhat into the norm. And the easiest way to do that is to think about, if I want to take away air time and step length, just provide resistance. So if you put resistance on somebody and run, you're going to reduce their air time and step length immediately. But you also work on some of the qualities they need to improve. So that was the first piece. And now what we've realized over time is that if you're a bounder and you have this like really good elastic system, they're not necessarily like the most reactive in terms of how like fast they can move through it, but they do utilize their elastic system a little more. They don't like very heavy resistance. Like very heavy is something that kind of pulls them out of the strategy that does make them good. Like there is some genius within our strategy. So we knew that the lightest, medium, at most resistance was probably the best. So that was the first lens that we went through. Now, the second lens that we went through on that was a force plate profile. So a CMJ and a drop jump, 10.5 RSI. And then we went through all the Natera tests from ankle, knee, and hip to isometric mid-thigh pull. So there was like a force plate profile. Now, on her force plate, we noticed that she was extremely poor in the braking phase. If you guys have VOD, you would say the deceleration part of the braking. So like once she passes the unweighting and starts producing more force than her body weight, that deceleration phase. If you're on Hawken, it's just the braking phase. She was extremely poor in that. Didn't produce a lot of force there, but also she didn't have a good rate of force development, so she didn't move through that force. She didn't move through that eccentric phase fast. And then we noticed that on the backside of it, like if you look at VALD, it has P1 and P2. So you look at like the second half of the propulsive phase. She was producing more force from like the plantar flexion side of things, like at the end of the push, where she was just over plantar flexing and getting her jump height from that standpoint. I don't know what that is in Hawken. Just if you look at the second half, I guess it would. What is that called when you have the bump, the unimodal versus the bimodal?
Yeah, unimodal, bimodal. Yep, the different types of peaks.
Yeah. What would she have there? Would that be bimodal?
Was it a double peak curve?
Yeah.
With the second being higher?
Yep.
Yeah, so I would call that a bimodal secondary, which is interesting because hearing you talk about her
a bounder is weird to do that.
Yeah, like hearing what you talk about her to this point, if you were to ask me what type of force time curve she had, I would probably say unimodal, but hearing that her braking capacity was limited, then it lends me to believe that potentially her curve doesn't depict the way it probably should. It would be interesting. Did it after you? And I don't want to cut you off because you're rolling, and I'm loving this so far. But like, as you were training her throughout this process, and like, I know that you trained her for a long time, but let's just talk about like this sample size you have from when she came back to you for this period of time. As you like put her on plates and were having her jump, did you see her curve change at all, or did she continue to resemble that like bimodal secondary strategy the entire time?
Oh yeah, no, it changed big time, and I think that was the first piece where we were looking at like, okay, you have this strategy, but your physical qualities don't match. So I was going to Danny like, yo, like this is the way that she moves, but she doesn't have like the physical capacities to support this strategy. And then like if you go further into it, like her we did the 10.5 RSI and it was okay. Like it was actually average for her cohort. But then you went to the ankle ISO, and then we realized like, okay, there's this massive asymmetry here. Hip ISO was okay. Like not great, but most bounders aren't like really hip driven and really strong there anyway. So like it wasn't a major thing. But yeah, over time, and this is where we got into like some different training methods and different things, like some experimentation, is we really worked on the braking phase. And we realized like on ground contact, she didn't manage the first half of braking well, the first half of the contact. And she was just kind of pushing out the back as much as she could to overcome the fact that she wasn't braking well in the first half of contact. And she wasn't comfortable putting high forces into the ground in that first half of contact. So it was interesting. And this is where, like, you know, Hunter, I was looking into your system. I stole a bunch of stuff from that. I was looking into what Stu was doing, stole a bunch of stuff from that. I went back to like old like Jay Schrader stuff and stole a bunch of stuff from that. You know, I was kind of like all over the place with it, but the main target was understanding that she doesn't manage her initial contact well. So she's not putting high enough vertical force into the ground, and she's not managing the braking half of that equation. Like when she hits the ground, she's basically protecting everything and by not hitting it hard. And then she's using the second half to really like over push and create that like Steph Curry type wrist action with her foot. And this is all like, to be fair, like this was all kind of like not new stuff for me, but I typically don't have three people working on one athlete where we could dive into the things like this. So if you're listening to this, like, man, I don't have time for that. Like, bro, neither do I. It was a very unique situation where we were in collaboration with Chelsea, the U.S. Women's National Team, Nike a little bit. Like it was kind of a mixture. So we had all these resources and all these people to really dive in. But it taught me a ton because I look back and I'm like, man, there's like 30 people I could have helped with this before and I didn't. But yeah, so that was the strategy. So from a training perspective, the training is way less sexy than what I just explained because what I just explained is cool, it's new. But from a training perspective, we just did light resistance for Excel days. We did no resistance on speed days, and we just kind of built her tolerance to like accepting higher forces throughout that process. So we started off with like dribbles, ankle, calf, then knee. Then we're like, can we put more force in the ground? Can and her strategy around the weight room kind of followed what you put out. Like we did the high force day there, and we integrated some of that like into a single session. So like we do the speed work, we do all that, but then we would do the high force day where we're working on the drops and things like that. So yeah, it was interesting. Like, I could probably go deeper on the Excel day. So that was our day. We did yielding, isometrics. It was more of our slow force day. Yeah, and honestly, the acceleration day was almost the same template the whole time. It was resisted, it was unassisted. So it was like a resisted run, probably like 6 to 8 kgs, and then it was unassisted, usually like 10 to 15, up to 20 yards, and then some level of horizontal jump or like med ball thrower, and that was kind of on a circuit. We just increased the volume, decreased the volume. On the speed day, it was some level of dribbling, some level of flies, and then we did a little bit of assisted work with her, and then weight room. The other 2 days, which is probably less sexy for this podcast, was built around her anaerobic speed reserve profile. So we did a conditioning test in the beginning, 1,200 meters, and did her speed test, and then built all her conditioning off of like a percent of her MAS. So it's less sexy for this, but basically she went from like a 650-ish mile to a 611 in that time frame while also improving the other qualities. And we never ran more than 3 minutes at a time continuously. So everything was literally tempo based or MAS based or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that was a long-winded answer, but the training was very simple. It was the analysis that was the more complex question mark. Like, hey, I wonder if we work on her braking qualities, will this influence her sprinting? And the answer is, yeah, it did. She got up to 18 something miles per hour, 18.3 miles per hour. She was right around like 17.1 when she came in and wasn't cracking above 17.5 for the past 3 years. Her strategy and her jumping changed significantly. In VALD, it was the eccentric deceleration RFD per body mass increased like 15%. It was, what else? Her R size somewhat improved, but not really. It was kind of interesting. Like it was kind of what it was, but her strategy shifted a little bit where her contacts were a lot better. So yeah, we had all these changes and we're like, okay, I guess it worked. And then we sent her back, and for the first time in 4 years, she played 85 minutes. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It was pretty special, to be honest with you.
I have about 9,000 things that I want to. Doc said he was going to go first, so I'm going to let Mike go, and then I'll roll for a second.
Yeah, go.
When she was actually gone from you guys, when she left, did she go from her bimodal secondary to a bimodal primary or a unimodal force time curve as a CMJ jumper?
Yes. Yeah. So, and I'll be honest, like some of it had to do with like she wasn't a consistent jumper before she came here, mainly because she didn't really understand like what we're looking at or why it's important. She's like, you're just looking at the jump height, so I'm just going to do it for you. After, like, once we've gone through this whole training block, like we've explained to her the importance of like what we're looking at. Like we're looking at the strategy of how you're jumping. Like Hunter just put out something about like the counter movement depth and those things. Like, there's a lens of that. There's also the lens of how we're moving through the eccentric phase. There's also the lens of how we transfer that over to the propulsive phase. And I think some of it is like the technical skill, and then some of it is like her physical qualities did shift significantly because we saw it shift on her running. So yeah, she did shift.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that she is potentially bimetal secondary if she is like a soccer player who probably has a large variation jump to jump in a CMJ, but then also
Yes.
has a bilateral ACL. Obviously, one of them happened a long time ago, but that would make sense from a potential Achilles intervention standpoint. So you have this bounder, you're maybe trying to turn her more into like a driver type runner. So obviously you're trying to use resistance. A tough intervention if someone has chronic Achilles issues. Obviously, like if it works well, it works well. How about also the use of maybe using assistance in acceleration to decrease ground contact times, especially early on? Obviously, you could do
Yes.
it in top speed as well, but also to take some of the loading off of the Achilles tendon. Obviously, which she's going to use if she is a bounder. She's a very connective tissue driven runner.
Yeah, no, the assistance was huge. We didn't use it as much as I would have wanted to, like mainly because we're working through the beginning phases of it, and it was unnatural for her. It was like a learning process, and we only had so many weeks, but we did utilize it, and it was good for her because basically the other side of it is like, yeah, the resistance reduces airtime and reduces step length, but if you have Achilles issues, then obviously you're going to put that more at a stretch. So feeling the tempo, like feeling the frequency side of things was really the important part for her. So like I guess I wouldn't move her more towards a driver necessarily by increasing the ground contact time. I think the piece that we wanted to do was increase the frequency. And increasing frequency, you want to reduce the air time slightly, but improve the ground time a little bit better. So she has like the feeling of what it feels like to accelerate like in a natural way. So if you were to stand next to her and accelerate, this is a Premier League soccer player, and like if it, she should beat most dudes that are not like professional athletes because her position is like kind of like a speed position. But you would be surprised at how poor she was off the line because of how much like range she would go through to create her first couple steps, right? So originally we actually use assisted accelerations, not just assisted like top speed. So just to get the feeling of acceleration. And then we switched to assisted dribbles. So like most people are afraid of assisted running because they're worried about the risk. Like I'll be honest, like I've taken maybe 1,000 people through assisted running. I've never had any issues ever. I've had more people hurt from resisted running than assisted, to be honest. So like I wouldn't worry too much about it. Plus it's technically submaximal. But the way we progressed was we did assisted accels just to get the feeling, and then we did free runs just to like unload it. But then we did assisted dribbles where we worked at the ankle first, so we're working the frequency of the contact. This is something I talked about with Ken Clark, is like when you do assisted running, the change that would happen if you're looking at a force plate under the track is that you do produce more vertical force, and especially in the first half of a contact. It also, the secondary thing is if there's more vertical force, you also increase the braking because the braking has to counterbalance, or else you'll just tip over and fall forward. So you have higher vertical force, but you also have higher braking. And we knew that's a piece that she needed to work on. So we started off with the ankle, increased the frequency. Then we went to calf. And as you go to calf, if you're being assisted, it's going to be faster. Then you went to knee, where it's now you're looking at like 85 to 90% of your velocities. Then you went to dribble bleeds, which was like 95%. And then we ended up doing super maximal, like over 100% of her speed a couple times as well, which is definitely important. Don't get me wrong, like, but I would say for her in the case that she was in, we weren't hired to make her faster necessarily. I probably should have made that clear in the beginning. We were hired to make her feel better and feel healthier. So we knew that the progression should be based around her subjective feelings. Like she's filling out wellness every day, she's doing all that stuff. But like we knew that if she could return back to her team a little bit fitter and feeling a little bit better, it was more important than her being faster. Now, if I wanted her to be faster, I probably would have done a little bit more like maximal type stuff, but it would have come at a cost of maybe the other pieces that we put together. So yeah, no, we love the assisted stuff, and I've used it with everybody in the past year and a half, 2 years.
And you probably made her faster just by making her feel better. Like she had the
Thousand
engine that
percent.
she wasn't able to show. One of the things that you said early was she like was crashing into the ground, and being a
Yes.
bounder, and like you mentioned, like she's probably a little bit more elastically driven, and it's interesting because it's like that's her archetype and that's how she wants to run, but then she didn't have the physical capacities to then like back it up, and it was just
Yes.
she was destroying herself, which is
Yes.
really interesting to think about because I deal with athletes that are in similar situations where they have the archetype to be a certain way, but they don't have the physical capacities to back it up. And that's why I have a lot of basketball players come to me with whatever, tendon pain.
Yes.
The interesting piece was the bilateral ACL and like the inhibition that she probably experienced from that. And then I begin to think like, yeah, she probably didn't want to break because of the force that was required that she would have to experience at those joints that have already been compromised, which is another just
Yeah.
completely interesting layer. One of the questions I had, which it was incredible to hear that you use some of the high force stuff, and I'm super like humbled and just surreal to hear you say that. But one of the questions I had was I begin to think about this high force application, and there's obviously things from a general perspective, like in the weight room, like traditional movements and drop catches and drops and overcoming isometrics. Were you doing anything on the field from like a high force perspective? Maybe with like your 1080 from pulling her into different positions, because I do think as much of deceleration is vertically oriented, there is obviously horizontally oriented forces that an athlete has to like deal with. So were you using any of your um or anything from like a horizontal decel perspective to pull her into different positions?
Oh yeah, huge. So the piece that I left out on this was on the capacity days. Those were also our deceleration change of direction days. So they originally started off as like more like physical like development days, and then transition into like change of direction, and then transition to agility, then transition to like small sided games by the end of it. But in the beginning, it was really Damian Harper's like breaking developmental stuff. So the 1080 was big into like pulling her into positions. Like we cranked it up. I don't remember exactly what the kgs were, but we cranked it up, and we basically have her like slow walk 5 times 20 yards, just like feeling those positions. And that eventually grew into like basically we would do like we put the resistance down, assistance down, and we do like hops, like little breaking hops, little breaking hops, little breaking hops. That transitioned to breaking like a fast breaking lunge, and then that transitioned to a lunge and then pull back. And then eventually we worked on just like the initial deceleration step. So like the first break that you put into the ground was the hardest thing for her. And like I'll make a loop back to sprinting, but in deceleration, the early part of the deceleration phase, so from the high speed to 50% velocity, is the most challenging piece for athletes, especially after bilateral ACL. Is like they're going to try to put most of the force and most of the like intensity into the second half of the braking, which is obviously more risky. If you assume that most decelerations end up in changes of direction, the second half, if you're putting more force and more effort into the second half, you're also having a change of direction demand at the same time. So like obviously that's not the best thing for you. So the first part that we looked at was like how do we manage the early part of our deceleration phase? And if you break that into like a technical component, the hardest piece for her was that initial break from a high speed, put that foot in the ground and break. And obviously that's a high force in a short time frame, so it's high impulse. It's very, very, very difficult to do. So we worked that initial braking step like in a linear fashion first, and then we just kind of carried that out as we went. So we would do assisted into like a deceleration zone. So we'd assist you 5 yards, decelerate in 3, and we'd pull you faster and faster and faster. Now, as she got better at that quality, we also saw some of the inhibition in sprinting start to go away, which is interesting. It's like it's something I kind of assumed, but it's not something I confirmed, and I don't know if there's research on it, but the deceleration we were doing on the capacity days was helping her sprinting. It was helping her manage the sprint, the first half of contact, which is interesting. it's also changing her physical profile. So we're starting to see her physical profile shift on the force plates. We're starting to see her ability to be more comfortable dropping from higher heights into from the box into the ground. Like, we're starting to see other signs that this is helping and it's working. And like, again, it wasn't something that we did a bunch of research and figured out something. We're just like, let's see if it works. Now, what we did from there is we worked on transitioning that linear braking into changes of direction. So like, you have the initial braking step, which is somewhat linear, but then you had the plant step and then the final foot contact. So like, we're trying to teach her how to decelerate and change directions in 3 steps, 4 steps, like if you need to, from high speeds. And that eventually changed into reaction and agility and then soccer. But yeah, no, the braking piece, we were implementing from a linear and then change the direction with the 1080. And we're pulling her from different speeds into challenging positions. So like, if you can't manage that early braking phase, the last foot contact on a 1080, it's going to pull you and pull you towards the machine. You're going to fall over. So if you don't manage that early part really well, it gets significantly harder. And that was the piece that was a secondary effect. But we thought, hey, like, if we're getting you faster and fitter and you're the same body weight, there's more momentum going into your changes of directions, and that's going to happen 60 times a game. Like, we need to manage this, and we need to help develop the braking almost equal with the speed increase. So like, if we increase your speed and don't increase your ability to brake from that speed, we're creating a gap there. So that was a huge effect for us.
It's funny whenever or not funny, but it's interesting to think that like we were just talking about her inability to brake whenever she's sprinting. But if she's showing an inability to brake with that, and then you think about all the decels she experienced in the game that are at higher forces,
Man,
and I don't know about soccer, but at least in basketball, more frequent. Then it's like, man, I'm sure she was in pain. Like that's a lack of capacity for something that's going to deal the most damage. One of the things you said that I think was interesting is the fact that whenever I think about like inhibition from like injuries, especially like let's talk about a knee.
yeah,
One of the first place my mind goes like getting athletes into like deeper ranges of motion and having them move through those deeper ranges of motion, because I think that like they want to live in like higher, more higher range of motion. But the other thing is like it does make sense that from just like a general force perspective, you're like exposing her to much higher forces there, like from a decel perspective. Therefore, when
yes,
you ask her to go run fast, those forces are going to be high relative, but not absolutely high like compared to decel. So like
exactly.
her system experienced these high forces. So that when you ask her to do another activity, even though different, her system's like, oh yeah, I've experienced forces much higher than this. I can produce whatever it is, 4 times body weight max velocity because I just experienced 8 times body weight decel.
A
So it's
thousand
like
percent.
interesting to think about the inhibition application from a decel to like sprinting perspective because it is so much absolutely higher from a
No, a thousand
decel.
percent. And that's where like we've taken sprinting and decelerating into this like primarily technical biomechanical context in training. And really, if you look at it from weight room perspective, it's like you're looking at varying degrees of how fast you can apply force, or how high the force is, or how long you apply the force. But it's just a spectrum. So like, it exists in the same spectrum you would in the weight room. It's just like you're at one end, and if you're doing a heavy bilateral trap bar eccentric, that's one end, and then the other end of that is like a fast deceleration, and it exists on that continuum. And I think if we looked at it in that context, like, anyone could train speed because you're just looking at it as like exposure to higher forces and from faster speeds. Like, that's the piece that I think the industry right now is missing, and we're looking at how do we technically make people better. And really, what we need to look at is making someone run faster is 100% correlated with the forces that they can put in the ground and how they manage those forces. Right. And it's if you focus on that piece alone, you will make people faster and healthier. And then you could add the other pieces, like what type of range of motion do you go through, or other pieces that are supportive of the forces that you put in the ground. But what happens on the ground is the most important piece of sprinting. What happens in the air is a byproduct of it. So obviously, like, there's pieces of that you need to get good at. If you don't swing the leg from a high height, you can't increase the force in the ground. So you have to swing it from a high height. Then you have to be able to slam it down to the ground with a stiff ankle. Okay, there's a lot in there that you can physically develop without technically teaching someone how to run faster. And I think right now, you look on TikTok and Instagram, the people that get the most likes and followers are the people that tell you how to technically do those things. Well, those are physical capacities, and you have to develop those physical capacities. You can't just go out there and try these things and try to look like Noah Lyles. You know what I mean? Like Noah's got an insane ability to put force in the ground very quickly and manage his breaking phase extremely well. Like you're not going to develop that by teaching someone how to lift their knee. So yeah, it's just a secondary point, but you got a great point there, Hunter. And yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
One of the things that I had started to see a little bit, and I don't know if you've seen this too, Les, is like when you're pulling someone on overspeed. Well, this part I feel like you do see pretty often, but when you're pulling someone on overspeed, there is a point in time where when you increase 1 kilogram or half a kilogram, like that person starts to slow down, right? Like it's obviously not a linear relationship. It's like for myself, once I got over like 3 kilograms, like 3 kilograms is always like I'll hit my fastest speeds there. If I go to 4, though, I will start slowing down. I say that with my athletes too. Like the athletes I work with too is like, all right, clearly you start to break yourself a little bit once we start to get up a little bit higher and pull. You're just not comfortable with that. And then I started to find like, okay, what if I was like pulling myself at a way higher weight, but then I'm just like, I'm not like actually running. I'm just like doing some deceleration work, just like slower deceleration work and deeper range of motion. You come out of that and let yourself get pull. It's like, oh, I can actually handle a 4 kilogram pull and not see this decline in speed, which I think is like the idea of this, you're breaking whatever the neurological, neuromuscular connection of like this inhibition is of like this 4 kilograms is now like I am shutting down as opposed to I can actually run with it, which makes me think,
1,000%.
yeah, which I like think was I never like used it within like a superset within a session, but like I would see it like day to day. Like I would try this with one athlete. Let's go a little bit heavier and just like go super slow, like walk into a decel, and then let's pull you hard the next day and let's see if that actually, because 2.5 kilograms, 3 kilograms, okay, now you're getting slower, whatever it is. So I don't know. I think it's really really interesting. I think for her especially, that's super cool. One of the things that I wanted to get into though was talking about some of what she's doing on the field and then transitioning that into the weight room. Obviously, you're talking about some of like the high force stuff, some of the force system type work. But can you get into a little bit of how you thought about that? And then maybe this is kind of where you were thinking about the reflexive eccentric application. If not, totally fine. But where did your guys' mind go when it came to when she was tapped on the field? How we're going to transition her time in the weight room?
Yeah, and honestly, like we thought about the whole session that I was doing as a single block. Like from the speed to the weight room was a single block, and it was the speed part of it was one end of the spectrum, and then we transitioned into the weight room and try to tap the other end of the spectrum or somewhat close to it. So the main pieces in our program that really, really, really helped were the yielding pieces to it. So like we did a lot of like yielding lunges, yielding like we went through a spectrum of yielding isometrics, which is something that she hadn't really been exposed to. So she'd been exposed to heavy concentric lifting, and that was kind of like a strength stimulus that everybody felt like was important for her. Like we got to get stronger, we got to get stronger. And I know you guys just talked about that on your podcast, and I know Stu and everybody else has been talking about it. But to be clear, like it didn't help her, you know. So when we went like from that to yielding, and then we did like some accentuated eccentrics and those things, just like traditional, like none of it was that sexy. It was very basic, but we started to see like the response that she was getting from it originally was like, whoa, like my body's like, I'm in a bad place today. Like I have not been exposed to this and I'm in a bad place. And originally that was like her feeling, a subjective feeling, and then quickly it moved to like actually like I feel like a little elongated. I feel a little bit better. I feel like I have a little bit more capacity. And then interestingly, the thing that she really struggled with was like continuous fitness. So in soccer, like you're doing 10K in a game sometimes, 12K in a game sometimes. So like that continuous running aspect of things. If you're not adapted to that, it can be really stressful on the body. So she would every time she would run a couple of minutes or so, like she would get pain and things like that. But once we started doing the work in the weight room, like she's like, man, I can handle this. Like I actually feel pretty good when I'm doing this capacity work. So the main pieces that she felt better on capacity, the deceleration, and the acceleration and the max speed stuff, obviously, as well. So that was one day was built around more of the slow force side of things. The second day was built around like the high force, and we kind of combined a little bit of the fast force stuff in that, because we weren't doing 3 lower body days, so it was really 2, so it ended up being a little bit of a combination of things. But the main piece that helped her the most there was overcoming isometrics on the ankle, the drops from different heights, and then a little bit of the reflexive eccentric side of thing. Now, like, to explain the reflexive eccentrics, like, I don't fully understand the whole side of it, but I'll explain it in the way that I can understand it. Actually, do I have time to go through like my story real quick? Because it'll provide context in this. So I had a femur fracture, and in correcting my femur fracture, they put a metal pole down my leg, so from my hip to my knee. So it's all titanium, 18 inches. I have 2 screws, and it's gnarly. It's crazy. Um, so originally, when I was coming back from that injury, like, I wasn't walking. I ended up, trying to walk too soon, which like messed up my walking gait and a couple other things. Um, and I didn't do traditional rehab because they basically told me I wouldn't run again. I was like, nah, I don't believe that. So when I came back, I had like all these like compensation patterns, I guess you could say. And at the same time, I was starting to run track, and I was getting back into it, and I was running like pretty decent, but I wasn't fast, and I wasn't like in the sprinter group. I wanted to be in the sprinter group. I kept getting put in the endurance group because I wasn't fast enough. And I went to my strength coach, and I was like, yo, I want to get faster. Like, what do I do? He was like, bro, honestly, just get stronger. Get a lot stronger. And Mark Proto, if you're listening to this, I'm not blaming you because you were right. But like, I definitely, I definitely got stronger, and I did not get faster. So I got up to like a 500 something squat. I was 315 clean, front squatting 455. I was strong. I was
Is
like
that because you had a
100.
metal leg, Les? Fuck.
Yeah. It's titanium hip to knee. Yeah. Um, but yeah, like, I got strong. I did not get faster, and that was kind of like my first thought process. Now, like, to be fair, like, if Mark was on this podcast, I'll try to get him on my podcast at some time. He'll tell you, no, you did get faster, but it plateaued. So anyway, when I left college, I was chasing the strength thing still. So I did like the conjugate system, the West Side barbell stuff, and I was playing around with a 585 box squat and 600 something deadlifts, and like, I would get incrementally faster, but I never felt good. I never felt like I was always pulling stuff. I just didn't feel great. So eventually I was like, I'm not deep in this performance world as a strength coach by any means, and I don't mean to like disrespect anybody that does that stuff, but I know as an athlete I didn't feel great. And then when I did my first combines, my athletes told me, hey, Les, I don't feel great when I do this stuff. I don't feel faster. And I'm like, oh, you'll super compensate and you'll get better and you get better. So that was like the basis of my thought process around like the heavy concentric lifting. Like, I remember reading Barry Ross's manual. It's like, only do the concentric part, only do the concentric part. And I'm like, man, I don't know. Like, I'm doing that and I'm still slow. So like, I mean, and like, slow is relative. Like, I could run relatively fast, but I wasn't nowhere near as fast as my friends that were way weaker and way more elastic and doing all the other pieces to it. So that kind of led me down originally the Jay Schroeder side of things, where it was like looking into that, and then that led me to super training, and then that led me to like more like off the beat stuff until I finally like stabilized when I ran into Stu and saw what he was doing, and that's a reflexive eccentrics thing. So really, like, what we were looking at was getting high forces from increasing the speed with lighter weight. So can you get into positions from a higher speed, and work through that like elastic side of things? So can we work through the stretch shortening cycle? And can we work on catches and drops and things like that? That's where my brain started going on Katarina. Like, that's the piece that she hasn't been exposed to. Because you remember when I was coaching her, I wasn't that great of a coach, and all I did was heavy concentric Barry Ross, lift the trap bar up and drop it. And that's all I did. So she had this base that was not great because of me. But yeah, like, I was going through it, and reading your force system. I actually bought the program, and I was like,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
like, Man, like if force is our target, like we can get to that force from a couple different ways. You can get there from the mass side of things, get there from acceleration side of things. Like let's increase the speed into this and let's just see how you feel like doing this block of training. Like obviously we knew from the slow force day that was probably gonna wreck her a little bit, but we wanted to see later in the week when we did the high force and the fast force side of things, like you should kind of leave that feeling better. And going into the weekend. And that's exactly what happened. She started saying like, yo, I actually feel a little bit better doing this than when I started today. Like, and that carried on, which led us, I don't know if like this is right or wrong. And again, I'm not like, not a strength coach by trade, but we actually flipped it where we did the high force and the fast force early in the week. And I don't, Hunter, is that something you've done or like,
So yeah, that was one of the things that I was going to ask, and something I think about myself is like typically when I go through it, it's generally speaking, it's like fast, high, slow. But I
yeah,
have had the thought, so it's interesting to hear you say this, to go slow first, because I think like whether you're coming off a weekend or coming off a day without training, like sometimes I think that for some of the individuals I work with, it's hard to like, all right, let's go hit linear speed, let's hit our oscillatory stuff, let's like do our Olympic movements. Sometimes I think putting slow at the beginning of the week and just hitting some yielding isometrics, touching some local tissue stuff, touching some like general upper body stuff could potentially contribute to the higher intensity stuff later in the week. So it's I'm interested to hear what you were about to say in terms of, because you just said what you said about slow and then moving into high fast, but I'm also interested to hear what you were about to say with flipping
yeah.
that and go fast high slow.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's exactly how I originally thought. Was like, all right, coming off of 2 day break because we gave her Saturday, Sunday off, like getting into it, like I'm not sure if you're ready for like the high velocity stuff and all that. So that was my original thought, but I think it was looking back, I think it was good in the general preparation phase where everything was general and everything was like kind of introducing the stimulus, and we know you're gonna be sore and we know you're gonna feel it. But as we got into like more like performance mode, it didn't make sense anymore because it was like like I can't have you feeling like this in midweek when we need you to perform at your best. Like, and we need to start integrating more things and get more specific and get closer to what we're going to experience in camp and all that. So I don't know where I came out on that, like what's better, because looking in combine, I'm still trying to figure it. And I'm going to be asking you as I get closer, but I think the early part was fine, and the later parts it was like no, like I need you to almost feel better every single day that we come in throughout the week, which was new for me. 'Cause I'm used to like wrecking people in the early part of the week and then lightening up by the end of the week, you know. And that's the real conjugate method.
I I do think that like going your higher intensity fast and high stuff at the beginning portion of the week and then finishing with the slow force stuff at the end of the week is probably still my preferential way to do it, because I think you can be more aggressive with the slow stuff at the end of the week. Like you can dig into
Yeah,
some like higher yield, like higher load yielding isometrics. You can dig into some like heavy eccentrics, like EQIs. And I'm like more, it's like when I think about training pre-practice versus post practice, it's like
facts.
pre-practice, I'm like, all right, let's like touch these things, but I don't really like really want to get in the tissue. If I get you post practice, like it's not going to feel you're not going to feel great when you're doing it. You're going to feel great after, but like we're going to dig into the tissue a little bit because I don't
Facts.
care if that's like touched a little bit more.
Yeah, facts.
This whole conversation, and I know we've danced around a little bit, but like the stuff that we've talked about with Kat specifically is so interesting because it's literally like the epitome of like what I think about when I think about like kryptonites and superpowers. Like
Mm,
her superpower is, from what I've gotten from you and talking to Danny and Chris, is like being elastic. And you talked about being a bounder, and like she probably should have been a unimodal jumper, but she was bimodal primary. And to
mm-hmm.
me, it's like her, for a lot of her career, she was probably dosed with so much of her kryptonite, and you finally fed her like her superpower, and she's like, yeah, I feel great. And it makes sense. Like you saying she's a bimodal secondary jumper, like she should not be, and that shows to me that like yeah, she probably is transition to be more like concentrically oriented,
Yes,
but now you're feeding her the things that make her
facts.
like superpower grow, and now I'm sure she does feel great. The place that people get into trouble, and not to say that everything was wrong beforehand, because like you still need to dose kryptonite. It just sounds like she got dosed a little bit too much, and then finally
Yeah.
like got away from it, and she probably did feel great.
No, and I started it. It was all the heavy concentric like strength stimulus, and you got to get it in and chasing the numbers. Even just like when we got VBT, we started chasing the numbers and doing all that, and all that was great. And she still needs an aspect of that. But yeah, it was the other part, the other end of the
Yeah,
equation. And like again, like I'm a super below average strength coach. So like when I started looking into, it was really just problem based. Like, okay, we know that what I'm seeing on the force plate doesn't match what her strategy is when she runs. So like
yeah.
obviously there's a gap. And then I was like, okay, let's fill this gap. And luckily at the time I just picked up like your force system stuff and I was reading through it and I was like, this makes sense because I added it on. It's a really nice add on in my progression of learning, starting with Jay Schroeder, but then going to super training, which was a lot, and then going to like a lot of like pseudoscience stuff, and then getting back to Kyle Salmons and Stu and then you. And it was like, okay, like let's try it. My appetite for experimenting with her was high because we tried everything else and it didn't work. So I was like, I don't think this is gonna undo anything, but let's just see if it works. And it worked really well.
It
So it
was
was
the
nice.
it was the perfect situation to begin to experiment with that stuff because it sounds
Yeah.
like that's exactly what she needed.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it sounds like all the things that would relate to her doing a CMJ and her being a bilateral secondary jumper is like, oh, a lot of concentric stuff, bilateral knee pain. It's like, okay, yeah, she should be a unilateral jumper, but like it totally makes sense that she was in fact something not ideal for her archetype. And
Facts.
thinking about like that specifically, and maybe being a little bit more general in terms of the athletes you work with. Obviously, you work with most athletes. The combine is like you get 8 weeks, hopefully for some guys. I'm sure shorter now for especially how long the college football season is for others.
Hmm.
And maybe it's not giving enough credit to performance coaches around the country in terms of making sure that they are giving the athletes what they need, but oftentimes just focusing more on the concentric based activity, but especially as it comes to speed development, like speed development probably just more resistance based to unresisted, like let's call it a day. So you probably have a lot of athletes who are coming to you and like and maybe they should be more on the bounder type, more in the bouncer type, but they're actually more on the driver type because of that type of training. So do you find yourself having to peel back those layers, especially early on in training? And when you're doing so, especially in a super tight timeline, is that something that is the one of the bigger limitations of what you're finding with these athletes, or is that again not giving enough credit to performance coaches in the
Yeah.
collegiate space, especially?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's interesting because like a lot of what I'm talking about is relatively new to me in some ways. So like I'm learning as I'm going. So my lens through this year is different than my lens before. I would say the one thing that I can comment on is I think collegiate strength conditioning is getting so much better, and there's a lot of really good practitioners in that space. And the thing that I've really worked on is like communicating with them early on and just like having some type of relationship. So I'm understanding what these guys are already doing. But like it's kind of weird to answer, and I'm gonna try to do it without seeming like a certain way. But like every year, the guys that we get are better. Like, and it's really like they're better draft picks. Like as we progress, we get higher and higher draft picks and better athletes and things like that. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes because like at one point I was just dealing with free agent guys, and I can say the difference between the guys that are like free agents or not high draft picks and the guys that are extremely high draft picks is not like that drastic, but in the 40-yard dash world, in the speed world, and in the way that we're testing outputs and capacities, it is very different. The higher draft picks are typically faster, they're typically more explosive, and those types of things that you would see. And this will probably go into another 3-hour conversation where I think the combine is stupid. Like it's actually idiot. There's no correlation, massive correlation between killing that and being an incredible 10-year NFL vet. Like there's a moderate value, but it doesn't. I don't think the importance that we put on it shouldn't be a third. It shouldn't even be a fourth. It should be like a 10th, maybe. But regardless, if you were to compare guys within that realm where it's very output driven, and it's speed focused, jump height focused, all that, the higher draft picks typically do better at that stuff. So now that we're getting higher draft picks, like we're sitting there in awe when those guys come in on day one, and we're like, whoa, you're almost ready. You just need like a little taper. You know what I mean? Like, these guys are finishing it's amazing. They're finishing college football season. They're coming into us and they're jumping really good. They're running pretty good. They feel pretty good. And I'm like, dude, so I think that the collegiate strength conditioning space is killing it when it comes, most of them are killing it when it comes to this. And, they're doing the things in season. They're sprinting in season. They're jumping in season. They're lifting in season. Now, to give you a little bit more context, like on the negative side, is like we have seen most of like the beginning parts of my career when guys were coming to us, they had only been doing heavy, heavy, heavy concentric lifting. And at that point, when I first started, they weren't even doing speed training. Like, it was conditioning based. There was a block of speed training after the spring game before summer and maybe somewhat of the summer, and then just quickly switched to capacity building, training camp. And then in season was just like either heavy concentric lifting or not lifting at all. And that was like kind of the standard like collegiate strength conditioning piece where in season wasn't that important, and whatever you built in the off season will show up in season. It's not really that anymore. It's very complex. It's high level. You see guys that are coming in and they've gotten better throughout the season. You know what I mean? So I think right now I wouldn't exist in the space that I'm in if it's not to the strength conditioning coaches doing the work during the season. The only thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna highlight one or two very specific things that they need exposure to basically taper them to run fast. Like, if you think that if you no, let me back up. If you think that combine training is actually making people faster and jump higher and all that, like, I'm sorry, you're not doing that in 6 to 8 weeks. Like, all you're doing, is taking what they've previously done and highlighting some things. So when it comes to that, like, yeah, like if we have a situation like Katarina where we can tap into like one or two things that will highlight what she already has, like, great. That's really valuable. And that's where the level of profiling comes in, where we can profile those things and find those things to bring those qualities out, to express them on the combine or pro day. But we don't have enough time to really change much. Like, you're just highlighting things. So yeah, I think right now the state of strength conditioning, especially in college football, I don't know too much about the basketball world, but like most of I'm gonna have a lot of people on our podcast too, but like Kyle Bolton, man, every time he sends me a guy, I'm like, okay, like, just tell me what to do. University of Washington, Tyler Owens, the USC guys, UCLA guys, like, I get a lot of West Coast guys, obviously, but Alabama, whatever. You get these guys and you're just like, you're trying to just study what they've been doing, and then say, okay, well, if we just give you a little bit exposure to this thing, and typically that's the fast eccentric side of things, that's the high force, that's a fast force. It's very rarely the slow force and heavy resisted stuff. Like, you just don't have time. It's very rarely the heavy resisted running. It's more likely the assisted running. It's the thing that they haven't prioritized because they have to play football. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of times, like, college football coaches catch slack because they're like, man, all you did was this and that. Like, okay, well, the kid made it through the season healthy and he performed and he played football. That was his main job. His job wasn't to run faster necessarily, like a 23-mile-per-hour run. Like, that's not your job. So when we get the guys and we just expose them to higher levels of velocities and higher forces and faster forces, like, that's really our job. Like, it's easy, I could say. Now, to back up one more step from that, I think the main thing as combine coaches that we have to really focus on and emphasize is that your job is not just to get them faster, it's to get them healthier. And that's where Danny comes in. And that's where Danny and Chris have developed a model where a guy comes in, we get a snapshot of who they are as a human. And our job is obviously the speed part, but we know we can get them moving faster by doing the things that we do. But going into their first season, can they be healthier? That's the real challenge. That's the hardest part. And to get like the P3 model involved in this, like where they took basketball and they're like, hey, this combine thing is irrelevant, but we can capture a lot of data during that period that will then help you. It's like a passport to your team. Hey, this is the snapshot of the player that we think is important for you to know. that is the most important part versus let's get this guy to run 4.
It is interesting to see how like the football side of things is growing or changing, because I think that, to your point, a few years ago, like, and I mean, you still see it. People are still hanging their hats on 1 rep maxes, which I think that will always be within the culture of American football. But I also do think that there are coaches within that realm that are beginning to challenge different spaces and realizing that that's probably not all the answer to the test, because as we've alluded to this entire time, like I've always said, like I think athletes would be better off, and this is a maybe outlandish statement, but I always have said that I think I haven't always said this, recently said this, athletes would probably be better off if all we did was like eccentrically oriented exercises and training, and like didn't even do concentric, than the flip. And I think that for so long it's been like so concentrically oriented that it's like, oof, we're getting far away from
Facts.
some very, very important qualities.
Facts.
So we could probably keep rolling for a while, but we want to also let you get back to your family, and that's the most important thing of your day today. So with that being said, we're going to hit you with our very last question, and then we'll get you out of here, just making sure we're respectful of your time. And this one is powered by 1080 Motion. And it is, what is something that you do or think that a majority of the field would disagree with? And we've hit some good stuff so far on this conversation, so we'll allow you to double down on something you've said. But if there's another thought that you have, feel free to throw that out there too.
Well, this kind of alluded to it, but I think that it's something that I perpetuated and pushed out that I now disagree with, is that I think that the heavy resisted running continuously throughout the year doesn't help everyone, and it might be unnecessary. Now, the cases where it is important is probably return to play and returning qualities and things like that. But I think that resisted running is important. I just think the heaviest, like 50% plus, isn't always necessary. And it's okay to put it in certain blocks and certain values. But I think we spend entirely too much time focusing on that. And it goes back into our whole concentric talk that we talked about, where like these concentric qualities become the emphasis and the focus. They're like the visible things you can see and understand and quantify and correlate and all that stuff. But I think that heavy resisted could probably go up there with 1 rep max trap bar deadlift. Yeah, they always will exist in some level of importance and somewhere. But I think the thing that actually moves the needle is the faster side of things, which is more essentially dominated anyway. So yeah, I think that's the main piece for me.
Whenever I know that was our last question, but then I'm gonna have another follow up. Sorry.
You're fine.
When it comes to like the heavy resisted stuff, and you and Mike, you could chime in on this too, like and correct me if this is potentially wrong thought process. But to me, like some of the heavy resisted stuff, to me is almost not. It doesn't fit under like my speed development lens. Almost, it almost fits to me as just like a little bit more specific exercise that you can do within like your training within the weight room. Like I've found myself whenever I'm like programming something and there's like the speed elements and then we transition and bridge to the weight room, it's like I put some of the heavy resistance stuff within the actual weight room program versus like putting it in within my complex of speed development. Like
it's strength training. And JB Morin has said that as well. It is strength training. I think speed training can be very simple. Just expose them to higher speeds and put them in different positions to do that. Like the strength part of it, and I've heard you say the opposite, and I think it's because you come from a strength world into the speed world, and I come from a speed world into the strength world. So we're both correct, but I think the speed side is actually very simple, very easy. I think the strength part is a little bit more complex, and that just is like my bias because I understand speed more than I understand strength. But because they exist in the same continuum, you got to put the resisted running piece into that strength piece, de-emphasize it a little bit, and just focus on the basics. You know, like we try to come up with these super complex ways of attacking it, and it's not that complex. And I've complexified it and perpetuated that more than anyone. So I apologize.
I think it's interesting because like speed development to me is like it's the combination of the high speed, the high force, the high stiffness, the high coordination. Heavy resistance sprinting is like you're just working on a couple of qualities of speed development. So it's not, which is like if I squat, I'm still working on one maybe partial quality of speed development. So it's probably closer to that than it is to actual speed development. But I think like Tony Holler, I used to like not really vibe with what Tony Holler used to put out because he was like, I don't do any resistance sprinting whatsoever. And I know that he also like likes to kind of like live on the edges of the extreme a little bit. But you like think about his situation where it's like he works with high school athletes. They all play another sport. Likely, it's like you probably don't need to do any resistance sprinting with that population. Like it's probably totally fine to never do like resistance sprinting with them because that's all they do is resistance elsewhere in training. So it's probably like totally applicable. So I like
tons of people have been successful without ever doing resisted running.
Yeah, and I know like Derek, like Derek is like, yeah, like you don't necessarily need to use resistance sprinting to like be fast, you know, which is like would be contrarian to most of the speed development work that you see in the performance setting. So I definitely
it does help aspects of your acceleration as long as you're doing the other end of it. It's like if you're trying to get a higher jump height, but you're only concentrically lifting. It's like, okay, well, that's part of it. Do the other part now, you know?
Yeah. So we'll get you out of here, Les. We know that we've taken up a good amount of your time, but we really appreciate it. We know you've been on our radar for a long time, so we're glad that we could finally make it happen.
No, I appreciate you guys.
Obviously doing it when you got a lot of things going on in your life, so we appreciate you making it happen for us.
No, of course.
Before we get you out of here, though, obviously you do have a lot of things going on with Spellman Performance. Can you just plug some of those things? We'll let you get out.
Yeah, like obviously Universal Speed Rating. If you want to be a speed lab, super cool. Like a lot of our education and mentorship exists within that ecosystem. The other thing is like me, Danny, and Chris are starting to do a lot more when it comes to like educating and getting out there. And obviously like this is where we want to spend most of our time, like the education piece. If I could just do that by itself, I would love to. But we are doing a team speed event with Stu McMillan in Cayman Islands in October 14th. It's right after the Sportsmith conference. And we're inviting all coaches out there. So we got a lot of cool people coming. But I would say, like, if anything, if you want to get involved, like, come out there, hang out with us in Cayman Islands. It's the best place in the world to spend time with people and connect. So, yeah, that's really it.
That doesn't seem like a bad place to spend some time in the Cayman Islands. I've seen a couple of videos. And shit, I'd be there.
Well, unfortunately, it's right when we start our season, so I might not be able to dip out.
I'd probably just call in sick a couple days and head down to the Cayman Islands. Make sure I don't post.
That is so freaking sick.
It is awesome. But well, Les, we'll get you out of here, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Like, this has been awesome. It's lived up to the expectations that we've had. So I, again, really, really appreciate your time.
Of course, guys. I'm gonna make sure my baby's not here.
Yes, go. I'll make sure that your wife didn't give birth already.
Yeah. See you guys.
Peace.